Okay, we have Jessica Sennet on the podcast today. I'm so thankful that you're able to join us. And for those of you who don't know Jessica, I did record just a lovely introduction for you, but she has so much experience personally and professionally, and so much wisdom to share with women before pregnancy, during pregnancy, as they prepare for the birth process, and of course in the postpartum period when we are challenged like we've never been challenged before. So I'm excited for you all to hear what she has to say. And Jessica, just so the listeners get a little bit of a sense of who you are, to set the foundation, and to get a sense of what brought you to the work that you do now, I'd love to just ask about your background.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be asked to speak about one of the things I obviously love to speak about, but spreading education and my own story and the work that I do is really important. So thank you for having me. My background, I think it's a little bit different of a story than people would think or would guess about me. I've kind of lived two lives, I like to say, and I came into this as a second career only because I was so drawn and so passionate to it. I actually started off as an actress in New York City. A lot of people don't know this about, yeah, your face is like, look.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, you never know what I'm gonna say. It's just, it is what it is. I lived 10 years in New York City, but I've always been interested in fitness. I've always been a gym rat. I've always been active. I was an athlete in university and high school, and it was always, movement is a big part of, who I am as a human being in my DNA. So that's kind of been constant. And I really started to get interested in it when I was, in my 20s, and I was looking for other jobs in between acting gigs, to kind of help pay my bills. And at that time, that's all it was for me. And it's funny because I look back and it was one of those things like, well, maybe I try this. And thank God I did, because I don't know what I would have done without it. It turned into be the best thing I've ever done in my whole entire life. When I, got certified and was like, okay, I'm going to try this, it was instantly something I loved. Making a positive impact on somebody's life, it just never gets old, whether it was my first client or, hundreds and thousands of clients later, that was over 10 years ago. So, I think that just changed my life forever. And then I got really interested in the work that I do now, pre and postnatal. When I moved to an area in New York City called Long Island City, Queens, there was just a lot of pregnant people walking around with dogs, and like I was thinking about starting my own family. It was just the very family friendly neighborhood, and I had people reaching out to me asking me to teach. I just was writing an Instagram post about this, like how I got started, asking me to teach this mom and baby class. And because I also was thinking about expanding my family, it was something I wanted to get more educated about. So I kind of, steered into the curve, as you will. And that's kind of how it started. It was kind of providing the women and the mothers in my neighborhood something that I didn't see and I didn't find for myself. Like I said, I'm an active person. I love to pick heavy things up and put them down. I just didn't see anything that was safe. And that was something that a form of exercise that was not only safe for the pregnancy and postpartum, but also was challenging enough. So it kind of morphed into that. And that's how really I got started. And I've been kind of going ever since. Sorry, that was really long answer, but that's it.
I loved it. And I definitely did not expect for you to say that you were an actress in a previous life. That's amazing. But it makes sense. You have
People
so
are
much
not surprised.
magnetism.
People are not surprised to hear. They're like,
No,
oh,
no.
you? Oh, now I get it.
Yeah, yeah. I was very much drawn to you. Like for anyone listening, like we met at the Toronto Baby Show, and I just found myself very magnetized to you and your table.
Oh,
So it makes sense.
that
You have that kind of
that's
energy.
nice. I mean, now
Yeah,
the work that I do, I'm in front of people all day long, right? So
right.
I'm act quote. No one can see me, but I'm doing air quotes right now. I'm acting all the time. I'm, one-on-one with clients. I'm in front of big numbers of classes. Obviously, at the baby show, I do speaking engagements. I don't have a problem speaking in front of people. So that acting training has definitely come in handy for sure.
It totally comes in handy when, like, in any profession, I feel like it would come
Yeah.
in handy, but definitely in this kind of profession too.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm not surprised about that. And I did want to get into dispelling because you mentioned picking heavy things up and putting them down. So I wanted
Right.
to dispel some myths because so many women are told not to pick up heavy things, nothing, definitely nothing over like 40, 50 pounds. But a lot of women get scared if they were given some kind of diagnosis or they have previous health concerns. They get really scared during pregnancy, especially the first trimester. We're told, like, like, you're so fragile. Just like let everyone else around you pick things up. And
Right.
for sure, there's some merit to that. People just want the best for you. They want to protect you, right? But I don't know how much that serves us because we want to be strong throughout our pregnancy, preparing for birth, and definitely in the postpartum period. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
There's a lot of things in that question, and you were touching on a lot of those different pieces. First of all, you're right, there's this idea that we're fragile when we're pregnant. That's not, I don't buy into that at all. You're creating a freaking human being. That's the most bad shit on the planet. So I don't subscribe to that idea at all. Now, that being said, I also don't want to be like, don't be scared, it's fine. Because there's value in, those are real fears. And God forbid that it took you a long time to get pregnant. There is a lot, we're working off of 50 to 100 years of just not bad advice, but just zero information. A lot of the prenatal and postpartum clinical trials and research just didn't exist for years. And a lot of the information that we have been given, it's crazy for nutrition and exercises were actually performed on men in like the 50s and 60s. So it's not a good history. So now there just wasn't information. So when there wasn't information, let's err on the side of caution. So we get this sit down, do nothing, eat for two, put your feet up. But now we're starting to see the research shows that that's actually the opposite of what's beneficial for us. That, keeping an element of cardiovascular health and maintaining a strength training program, working on your pelvic floor, learning how to breathe, um, you know, is actually super beneficial, not only for the labor and delivery part. And we can get into this in detail, but labor is hard work. I've labored, right? It's an athletic event. The average first time labor is 12 to 24 hours. It is not a walk in the park. Wouldn't it make sense to keep some sort of higher intensity element up in your life, whatever that is? And we can get into the details of what exercise you want to do, because I don't subscribe that it has to be one specific thing. But it not only makes the process of labor and delivery easier and physically, but mentally as well. Exercise is a big mental piece too. And then you can set yourself up for a successful recovery. So um, I can see with the history and the research, we know why women and people and medical professionals are feeling or prescribing these things and saying, don't lift anything over 10 pounds. I was told that. Um, I deadlift 200 pounds very regularly. That doesn't it doesn't make sense for me. Anyways, and also I'm talking if you have an uncomplicated pregnancy, if you have, high risk or anything, obviously you want to, listen to your medical professionals, but I'm speaking in very general terms that you are like, it's okay and it's safe. And they just came out recently with two more studies. I don't have the exact um, information in my head right now. I was reading about it a couple of weeks ago, that there is no link between exercise and miscarriage. There is no link between exercise and preterm labor. There is no link in exercise in any sort of complications, which is the reason why we think is the reason why we wouldn't exercise originally. So
Mm.
we're we kind of have to work backwards and start from the beginning. It takes about 18 to 20 years for the research to show up in common practice. So we're still in this gray area of where we're still seeing these guidelines, um, this advice from medical professionals kind of being into the world. So it's going to take some time. But the 2019 guidelines in Canada had elements of strength training, pelvic floor, cardiovascular work, said 150 minutes per week on non-consecutive days of moderate intensity exercise. Like they use the word moderate as opposed to light. And that was a big deal for someone like me because it shows that even though there's a spectrum there, we're not dealing with like, okay, light, like walking. You can
Mm.
do walking and light yoga. We can do more. We can push ourselves. We can sweat. We can breathe heavy. That's what labor is going to be. So let's
Mm.
talk about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack, especially when like the common idea is that you're in this like precious state, you're fragile, and you're always getting input from people around you like, no, 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 don't pick that up. Let me do that for you. Let me do this for you. And so you kind of feel like, oh, like maybe I do have to be like on the super cautious side of things. But no, you're right. Like I always talk about preparing for birth and how it is like one of the things that requires a lot of preparation and training, and women just go into it blind. Like, would an athlete, knowing that they have an Olympic event,
I was
just
just about to say
not
that.
train? Yeah.
I have a slide in one of my presentations comparing like the first time labor to a marathon. And
Hmm.
if you were choosing to do this big event, you would prep for it, right? You
Hmm.
would change your diet, maybe you would do a training program, you would do like a run a couple times a week. I don't know. I've never trained for a
Hmm.
marathon. It's never going to happen for me. I'm not a runner, I'm a lifter. So they tell me you would do something. And the fact that the majority of, parents out there are basically, doing their baby shower list or their registry list and painting the baby's room and taking like maybe a hospital birth plaque and that's it.
Hmm.
2 years ago, the research from SOCOG says that 2 out of 10 women get the recommended exercise amount. 2 out of 10. It's not okay. It's like,
No.
and there was
No.
a systemic review to show that mostly the reason why is that women don't know what to do. They know they should do something, but they don't know what to do. And then for that reason, they do nothing because they're scared about there's either too much information or not enough information. So instead of they just do nothing. That's a safer bet because that's what
Yeah.
everyone's doing. It's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be really overwhelming when you do try to find out what you should do. And like there's like a bajillion articles and YouTube videos, right? And then you don't know how accurate that information is. Can I trust this person? Can I trust
Don't
that
do this. Don't
information?
twist in pregnancy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't lift this way. Don't do like I
Hmm.
have to tell you, don't lie on your back. Don't lift out like we just said a bunch of that stuff. Mostly none of it is true. And
Yeah.
if it is like maybe the lying on your back, I've there's a reason why that has become a prenatal myth or like as something you should do. And I've heard people say that after trimester, don't lie on your back.
Mm.
But the real reason is that, it's not like the reason is that when your baby becomes of a certain weight inside, if you're lying on your back, could put pressure on your inferior vena cava, which is the big vein that brings oxygen and blood back to your lungs. If that happens, which is rare, it can make you feel dizzy, lightheaded, a little nauseous. No permanent brain damage to you or baby. It's not dangerous at all. All you need to do is like roll to your side and
Hmm.
push yourself up and find a different position. I've trained thousands of pregnant women. It's maybe happened to maybe 5, 6. So is it okay to lie on your back for short periods of time? Yeah, if it's comfortable for you. If it's not comfortable, don't do it. I
Mm.
lay on my back and slept. If it was really that dangerous, we would all have these things to keep us on our sides, you know?
Yeah.
And doctors will ask you to birth on your back. Like it doesn't, none of that stuff makes sense at all.
I
So a
know.
lot, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Anyways,
Yeah.
like I said, it's just a spreading of old, outdated information.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me so much of the birth process itself, where there's like this small percentage of things that might go wrong, and so we treat 100% of the cases as if those things are going to go wrong,
That's right.
and it's you enter the birth process, especially as first time parents, you enter it with so much fear and uncertainty and anxiety, instead of what you're talking about is like, can we connect to our bodies, can we trust our bodies, can we work with our bodies, you know, instead of, and we do want to feel safe, but it's like, what is the line where we are putting, this old information on a pedestal, and not really seeing what's in front of us. So I love that you talked about that. I loved also that you talked about the mental aspect of movement and exercise,
Mhm.
because that is so big as well in preparation for labor and birth. It is so much a mental game, and so much of the benefits, if you do move your body and connect to your body and learn to trust your body, come from that exercise that you've done, that like quote unquote training that you do for that process, which helps you during labor, which helps you during birth and in the postpartum period as well. And so there's an, a large list of benefits of moving your body throughout your pregnancy
Stress is
and
the big
finding
thing, right?
someone. Sorry.
Sorry, I was saying like stress
Yeah.
is big. It's big in any health history in any person, but especially in the perinatal period, pregnancy, stress and how our body handles stress completely affects how we feel,
Mm-hmm.
how we move, how we feel pain, how we show up in the world mentally, physically. And exercise is a big stress relief.
Mm-hmm.
So, fully taking that away from somebody in the way that they like to move is really it can be detrimental. If you say to someone who loves rowing, or someone who likes CrossFit, or someone who likes salsa dancing, or someone who like whatever, it does anything. You can't do this for 9 months. That's, you're taking away their ability to mentally deal with a lot of things if that's their outlet. And for a lot of us, it is. It's not everything, shouldn't be everything, but it's a big part of it. It's definitely for me. So someone, and that has, I think, again, learning how to keep these things in. And I'm always trying to say, what can we do? Like, there's no reason why we have to take things away. We have to obviously modify and to find and now that I've said you can definitely do all of these things, I'm not saying continue to lift 200 pounds throughout the entirety of your pregnancy if you've never lifted before. There are obviously modifications, there's guidelines, there's things that we should be watching out for in terms of what's, you know, best for us during pregnancy. It's not that you won't, and on the same side, I want to say not the not the best advice. Like we hear, like keep doing what you're doing. Yes, but to a point, do you have to change what you're doing in pregnancy in terms of exercise? Yeah. There are guidelines, there are things that we do in our prenatal classes, there are things that we teach. I'm not saying you shouldn't modify at all, but you really want to you can keep most of what you're doing intact. There's just a few things to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings me to what I was going to say, which is to find someone who is knowledgeable in this area,
Yeah.
and has a lot of experience and can help you find that kind of that sweet spot of what is safe, how to modify things, and like during which trimester, what might be best, what we can take away, what we can add at different times. So yeah, I think it's just finding that community, finding that guidance of
Of
people
course.
who are who are kind of like maybe not experts, but very knowledgeable in this field.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also talking about your pelvic floor, which I think is a big thing that we sometimes like don't pay attention to at all throughout our pregnancies in preparation for labor and birth and the postpartum period. Or it can be a point of anxiety for a lot of women. So let's talk a little bit about that. And
I
yeah,
would
I'd
love
love
to
to
talk
hear.
about pelvic floor. Love to.
I'd love to hear your take on it.
Uh, I think I would be a bazillionaire if I had a dollar for every time I mentioned the word pelvic floor. We do pelvic floor work in all of our classes, and I've been doing it for 10 years. So um, it's important to talk about pelvic floor specifically in pregnancy and postpartum because the area that's compromised the most during the changes of pregnancy is our core system. A woman's body goes through more changes during pregnancy and postpartum than a man's body goes through in his entire life. It's birth is an injury. There is a shift that is going on. That's not a bad thing, but it's an incredible thing. And to just like not acknowledge that at all doesn't serve us. And so it's compromised. Pregnancy is a factor in core dysfunction, period. Doesn't matter what pregnancy or birth outcome that you have. So acknowledging that is number one. And when I say core, I really mean your inner core muscles. So your diaphragm, your deep abdominal muscles, your transverse abdominis, your pelvic floor, which is the bottom of this core unit that we're talking about. And we'll go into like, it's not an anatomy class on the podcast today, but I want to kind of be clear a little bit about why it's so important. So we have your diaphragm, your TA, your pelvic floor, and your back muscle, your multifidus, and they run really the structure and support for our entire body through a pressurized system. And that system is compromised very plainly in pregnancy. And there can be a lot of pressure. If you think about it, there's the weight of a child that's growing inside. So the pelvic floor takes on a lot of that kind of support piece, that stability piece. And then it's really important to talk about pelvic floor in terms of delivery. And this is actually something that a lot of people don't know. We think that let's prep for labor, let's do a bunch of Kegels and get our pelvic floor really strong. That's not actually the most beneficial because it's not actually your pelvic floor pushing baby out. It is your abdominal muscles in your uterus, which is a giant muscle. That's where contractions come. And they're painful because they're pulling on the uterosacral ligaments that are attached to the body. We actually want the pelvic floor to get the F out of the way, to relax and become soft and make that pelvic opening as wide and as spacious for baby as possible. So instead of pelvic floor strength, which is important, coordination is important, the talk in pregnancy is actually pelvic floor relaxation. Can you relax your pelvic floor? Do you have the control to engage your pelvic floor and your core system when you need support? So when you're lifting an exercise class, when you're lifting groceries in your everyday life, but do you have the control over your pelvic floor to relax during the labor and delivery process? When a good prenatal exercise program should address this. And not only, for labor and delivery, but, pelvic floor work, core breathing. That's the number one thing you can do day one in the hospital or your birthing center on recovery. That's the first step when we talk about getting back into exercise in postpartum. So it all kind of connects to each other. That's why it's so important to talk about it. Because it is the foundation basically for what you can and cannot do. And what is safe or not during pregnancy. Is it putting too much pressure on your core system? Is you swinging that 50-pound kettlebell, back squatting 100 pounds? Is it putting too much pressure on your pelvic floor and your core system? We talk about that a lot. So yeah, we talk about pelvic floor quite a bit during prenatal exercise, but that's the reason it is that important.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And that's why you hear a lot of like Pilates instructors, the bar instructors, ballet dancers, because their pelvic floor is so hypertonic, so strong that they often have some difficulties during the labor and birth. And not always, but So it's not, I agree with you, it's not just about making those muscles as strong as possible and doing like a bajillion Kegels. It's really about having that control over those muscles.
The majority of athletes, and you said it, not only Pilates professionals, have an excess of tension. I was one of those people. I had a ton of excess tension left over from, I had many surgeries, pelvic floor surgeries in my 20s. And, I developed where there's pain and trauma, your body grips and holds, right? So there's not enough oxygen getting this to tissues. And after a certain amount of time, you can't relax. You don't know how to do that. So pelvic floor physiotherapy is really can be beneficial in pregnancy and then in postpartum, because if you have any outlying issues, they can be addressed. And usually if you have some issues going on, pregnancy will bring those out right away.
Mm-hmm.
And working on those things during pregnancy can set you up for success in postpartum. But generally there can be an excess of tension, which can lead to painful intercourse, aching, burning, stinging when you pee. I experienced all those things. Or other signs of core dysfunction. So incontinence, leaking urine, that can be a sign of a tight pelvic floor, or weak or uncoordinated. There's many different ways. Pressure, heaviness, where you don't want to be feeling pressure. That's the pressure in your core, maximal doming or coning at the front of the abdominal wall. There's many things that happen during pregnancy, but none of this is to be scared of. Like, you don't have to be scared of it. It's information. But there is professionals out there to help you deal with all of that stuff. But those are we got to talk about it. It's common. Those things happen.
Yeah. It's so common, and I'm glad that we're having these conversations just so women could be like, "Oh, that's interesting." Like I just spoke to a friend the other day and she thought it was like a party trick that her abdomen when she was pregnant would like turn into like a triangle, like a cone,
Yeah.
right? And she had no idea that that was her abdominal muscles opening up, right? And she
That's
had to do
right.
a ton of physio afterwards, right? So if
Right.
we at least talk about it, then women know, like, hey, maybe I can get some support with this party trick that's going on here.
And
Um,
that's completely normal, by the way.
yeah.
It's Stacey's. And we can kind of talk about, that's what we're talking about when we say diastases, is there's a connective tissue called the linea alba, which connects the bridges of the rectus abdominis. That's your six-pack muscle in the front of your abdominal wall, right? And during pregnancy, you have a lot of hormones acting on you. So progesterone, relaxin, estrogen makes that smooth muscle in your body, as well as your ligaments and joints, and kind of give and relax, so that fascia kind of gives way, right? And thins out, and the ridges separate. That's why we call it the separation of the abdominals. But it's really just making room for baby. That's 100% normal. And every woman gets a diastasis at least by third trimester. So it's not something we should be scared of. Where it becomes a little bit more of an issue is sometimes that connective tissue doesn't regain a lot of its strength. So you can, sometimes when there's a buildup of pressure, you can see doming or coning. It can cause other issues, not necessarily. And there's even new research being done, last year or 2 years ago, about how not all doming and coning is created equal. We used to say, well, if you see doming and the abdominals, you stop the exercise. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. I just finished another certification, soft doming versus hard doming. It's just, there's so much research going on now, which is exciting because we are getting better as fitness professionals in this space. We're getting that much more educated on how the best way to treat our clients and to help them, not only during pregnancy, but then again in postpartum. It's very interesting, all of this, but we need to talk about it, and normalize the conversation, and it doesn't have to be scary, right? There's things
Yeah.
that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the, like, my biggest intentions with the podcast is to dispel a lot of the fear that happens as soon as women get pregnant or are trying to get pregnant. And yeah, just
People
so much fear,
know,
uncertainty.
I think people know about diastases, and like 10 years ago, people didn't know about it. Now they know. They're like, I don't want to get it. How do I fix it? what do I
Yeah.
do to make, I don't want to make it worse. So I'm not going to do anything. So we actually have gone overboard where most people know what it is. But in terms of like, I don't want to, now I'm going to do nothing because I don't want to make it worse. And that's not necessarily
Yeah.
helpful either. So it swings both ways. I'm happy that people know and are starting, people know much. I don't have to suggest pelvic physio pretty much to, like there are most people are know about it, have already been in there. 10 years ago,
Mhm.
I was still explaining what a pelvic physio was to a lot of people. Every now and then I get that, but I
Yeah.
think people are educated. The internet is there for a reason. I think there's good there. We're talking about it more. I just think we need to go further because we don't want to scare people with the amount of information that's out there too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the flip side of the coin. Like before we didn't know much and now we know so much that it scares us. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about prolapse as well. So,
Right?
what are some of your recommendations if someone has already experienced prolapse with like a previous pregnancy or postpartum period and are pregnant again and are wanting to prevent things from worsening or just to improve the state as well as they prepare for labor and birth and the postpartum period?
Um, I think that's a common fear of someone who has dealt with prolapse to get pregnant again. Just because you had it once doesn't mean it's going to get worse in your second pregnancy. There are definitely things that you can do, working with the pelvic physio, figuring out what you're specifically dealing with and doing some pelvic floor physio exercises, strength training, like like lifting is very beneficial for those dealing with some prolapse because generally they're, when you strengthen the muscles of the pelvis, the pelvic floor, the glutes, the hips, that can really be beneficial. So really focusing on, squats and lunges and deadlifts can be, I would definitely suggest adding that into your program. And being really gentle with yourself. I think fear plays a big part in, again, how we react to our body symptoms. Your grade of prolapse doesn't necessarily equate to that level of symptoms, even though there's, I'm not sure if you've said this already, but a prolapse is when you have your pelvic organs descend into the vaginal wall, and you can have a prolapse of your uterus, of your rectum, of your bladder. And there's many different grades, so that's how far they've descended. And if they've descended pretty far, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're feeling symptoms, and vice versa. If you have a little, like a grade 1 prolapse, you could have major symptoms. There's lots of different factors um, that attribute to prolapse as well. Sometimes there can be bladder irritants, your diet. There's a lot of different factors to kind of go over, but it's not black or white. I'm having a second baby. My prolapse is going to get worse. There are things you can do.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned diet. Um, so I would say from my knowledge in traditional Chinese medicine, like caffeine,
Yep.
um,
Alcohol.
cold alcohol, cold things like dairy products and ice cream. Yeah, so just so women can be aware that like you do have some control from other aspects of your lifestyle that can contribute better or worse to what's going on.
100% hormones, where you are in your cycle can be a big factor in your symptoms. I have a client that feels major heaviness before her period. And so not being scared of that and knowing that it's a temporary symptom, having management, having forms of how to manage where you're at is the key, and feeling in control of that. And knowing that it's only temporary and there's things that you can do. Um, but I think it's not just, well, if you do your Kegels, you can.
Yeah.
Kegels are rarely the answer, I have to say. And they're good for some things. I'm not saying you should never do Kegels because they do build strength. But they're not like a blanket cure for every pelvic floor issue, at all. But really looking at the whole person and figuring out why, what is, I think there's that's what I do, even though I specialize in strength training, obviously, but the questions we ask in an assessment and what's your diet like? And, we do all of that stuff because it all matters, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, as a naturopath, we like to look at the whole person, take a very
totally.
holistic approach, see what's going on. Um, I will say for women who are listening, from my personal experience, after my first birth, and I feel like it was more what I was doing after the birth that contributed to a prolapse. And so I always on the podcast will talk about the first 40 days, how women should really prioritize healing. And I'd be interested in your take because we might have different takes on it, but I really feel like rest is incredibly important as you're healing and really listening to your body as you're moving, and not pushing yourself to do those tasks like the vacuuming and the mopping and the laundry. Like that's when your community should really surround you and help with those things so that you can prioritize bonding with baby and breastfeeding if that's something that you choose to do, and just like really listening to your body and being in tune. Um, because I really feel like I pushed myself. I remember breastfeeding and mopping the floors at the same time. And never would I, now knowing what I know, do that. I would just be like, the floors can stay dirty. You know what I mean? So what's your take about the early postpartum period?
We have the same take
Oh,
on
okay.
it.
Okay.
I don't think we give our bodies, birth is a major injury. It's a great injury to have. Birthing is amazing, but it's an injury. You have a giant wound inside your body. That's if all goes well. I'm not even talking
Yeah.
about birth trauma and other things that could have affected, if you've had an emergency cesarean, if you've had a C birth, like that is, it's a class 1 surgery. You probably didn't get any outpatient resources. Most of us don't. It's wild. The support is lacking in terms of what you get. I agree. You need to give your body the rest and recovery that it needs, even if you feel fine.
Mm,
I had the same thing happen to me at 2 weeks after I've had one of each. I've had a cesarean with my first, because I've had pelvic floor surgeries. So it was better for me. I felt better with my decision to opt for a cesarean for my first birth, which I have all sorts of mixed up feelings about it, but I chose it. Tackle that another day. And then I chose a cesarean again with my second, and he came so quickly that there was no time. So I ended
mhm,
up with a VBAC, and it was fine. I teach birth prep and breathing techniques and all this stuff for a living. So I did all of the stuff that I know how to do.
yeah,
And he, minimal tearing was everything ended up to be fine. So I have this one of each situation. But during my cesarean, I felt fine enough the 3 weeks after, and I went to the grocery store and classically went for one thing and then went and got like 20 things and carried those groceries home because I lived in New York City and
mm,
nobody has cars there. I just walked 3 blocks, and I had a ton of pain on my scar the next week. And I went so much so that I went back to my doctor. I'm like, something's wrong. And he was like, nothing's wrong. You just did too much too quickly. So again, we live and learn. And I think you have your whole life to exercise and lift heavy. What you should prioritize is your rest and recovery and bonding with baby. Now, at least for 4 to 6 weeks,
yeah,
give your body the time. Even if you feel fine, your fascia, even if it's not back to its original strength, that there's things that we can't feel, even if we're like, I'm fine, we need to kind of let the body exhale a little bit.
mm,
That's not to say you can do nothing. I think little bits of movement coordinated with breath work, walking, gentle stretching, things like that that make your body feel good, I say is really beneficial. I didn't do any of that. I could barely get I didn't want to exercise until 12 weeks with both of them. I didn't feel that I was ready mentally. I wasn't ready physically. The 6-week checkup, is random for when you should be exercising. It is
Yeah.
basically a check to see if your uterus is down to size,
Yeah.
and that you have no infections at 8 weeks for a cesarean, fine. But it is not a marker of when you should be exercising. You come back to it when you're ready. And we say this in our classes all the time. Just because I'm a fitness professional, I'm not like, get back in the gym.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time. None of that. If it's 18 months, great. If it's 3 years, great. If it's 8 weeks, great. I think everybody comes back to it. You're living in a different body. Your body has changed, and acknowledging that is a big deal. And it's tough for a lot of us that really have our identity wrapped up in our physical ability, right? So dealing with that mental side of it is challenging as well. But acknowledging that you don't have to come back at 6 weeks. There is no medal for that.
Right.
And I think the mom fitness industry is terrible and damaging, and it doesn't serve parents and mothers well in this very fragile time. We see like, get your pre-baby body back. Like we see all of that stuff, and that doesn't help us. You shouldn't be dieting. You shouldn't be over exercising when you're breastfeeding a child. I think it's wild. I think it does
Yeah.
every parent, every mother a disservice to be like, well, you birthed a baby, so like snap that back now. Let's erase that evidence
Mhm.
immediately. I don't subscribe to that. Even though I'm a fitness professional, I want you to feel good about your body. I want you to feel whole. I want you to feel strong, but let's get strong in the body you have, the current one. And that's different. So making your peace with that, it's a mental and physical journey, but doing that when you're ready, and it could be years.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was 2.5 years until
Yeah,
I felt ready to like really push myself in the gym.
totally.
Whereas before that, it was just like, gentle yoga and going for walks and like playing
And
with my
that's
kids,
fine.
going on the monkey bars. Yeah.
I mean,
And
that's
and
fine.
that's when I felt ready.
But I think people, moms especially, will are made to feel a certain way because they don't feel ready at 6 weeks. They're cleared for exercise. Just because the doctor says, okay, you're cleared for sex now. Who's having sex at 6 weeks postpartum? No one. I'm like, do not touch me. No, thank you. So, I mean, just because they say you can doesn't mean you're ready. And honoring that journey is super, super important. And that's the message that we also want to, it's wrapped up in my company's name. That's the message we really want to push here and change, because I, I think we deserve better.
Oh yeah,
We do deserve better. I think
we do.
we do. We don't. So being a new mom is so hard. We don't need that added pressure of weight loss and how we look to be a factor in that ever. But
Yeah,
definitely not at 6 weeks postpartum. It's wild, wild.
yeah,
So I think that is also something to really, I'm glad we're talking about it. I'm glad it came up.
yeah. I'm glad we're talking about it too. I just recorded a podcast with a dear friend, and it was all about body image.
Hmm.
After we have our baby, during the pregnancy, even all of these things. So I'm glad we're talking about it too. And I'll just reiterate, like, set those boundaries with the people around you. Like, I don't know about your family culture, Jess, but for me, like, my aunts love to talk about bodies. They love to talk about, comparing you to your
Totally. But
pre-pregnancy body, all of those things.
that's the world that they grew up in. Oh,
Yeah,
I can't eat this cake because I didn't work out today. I
yeah,
totally had that in my 20s, my 30s. Old
yeah,
habits die hard. It's the world we all grew up in. So it's not that I'm not surprised, but
yeah,
we're starting our generation. In my 40s now. I'm going on this, I'm not perfect, but like I'm learning better for myself. And the goal
yeah,
is it will be better
yeah,
for my children. Not only I have two boys, but for any children who look at their body and want to change, like the goal is for it just to be slightly better for them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm on board with that. Yeah. And I agree. Like I have two girls and I'm like, one of them is 5, my older one. And I'm like, oh, better not start already at her age, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so we're definitely in line. I'm so happy to hear your take on so many of the questions that I had. And before we go, I'd like to ask you one more thing. So the intro to this podcast is let's imprint, speaking of kids and having it be better for the next generation, let's imprint love, safety, and trust onto the next generation instead of, you know, anxiety, uncertainty, fear, survival mode, all of these things that often get imprinted. So if you were to imprint something onto the listeners, a lot of the listeners are women who are pregnant or maybe even in the preconception phase. Maybe they're preparing for birth. Maybe they're in the postpartum phase. What would you like to imprint onto the listeners?
That's a good question. I think it's just this idea that you can, period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could get into the very much details, and I feel like we touched on some of the details as to how you can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but specifically in terms of movement, moving the way that you love should not be a sacrifice just because you're pregnant. And it's actually going to be beneficial for you. All you need is a little bit of guidance to show you how to do it, what to do, how to feel good, and it's going to be super beneficial. So I think it's not letting things hold you back, and that you can, and that there's a lot of things that you might be scared of, especially if you had previous negative experiences. But I think that's what I want someone to walk away with, especially for pregnancy and movement. And then if you're postpartum, um, that again, it's you can, but it's you can at your own pace, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different ways to do that. We obviously specialize in strength training, but like when I do these podcasts or workshops or anything, my goal is for people to walk away feeling more confident about moving in general, whether it's with us or whether it's with their own trainer. They come back with some, okay, this is what I learned and I want to talk about this, I think it's basically this idea that it's all possible and you have to find what works for you, because
Mm-hmm.
like the research is there to allow you to do what you want to be doing. Yeah, that's it.
I love that. You can. So
Okay.
simple and
Yes,
like and a big, big message.
I think so.
Um, so Jess, how can people find you? How can they work with you if they're interested in learning more?
Yes. So we are primarily located in the GTHA. We are known for our stroller strong postpartum fitness classes. We're outdoors now, it's summer. So we're all over 15 parks over Ontario. We are an incredible team. It's not just me. I have an incredible team of trainers. We also take private clients. We don't own a brick and mortar space, so we mostly travel to our clients. So if you're in our zones where we have coaches, we can absolutely do that. We also have online training. If you're looking for some support, we have online training programs, customized online training programs, you name it, we do it. Basically, if you're not in like Ontario, and we're expanding all the time. So you can find us at mightymom.ca on the internet. You can also follow our brand account on IG. That's where we show up at Mighty Mom Training. If you want to follow me, I do more business, personal stuff on my account, but I'm connected to our brand account. You can find me at Mighty Mom Jess. We answer DMs, and if there is a specific question about something you're dealing with or a problem that you're having or you need support, if we can't answer the question, we will find someone that can. And we have an incredible network of professionals that serve our clients as well in our village of care. So come reach out, come take a class. We'd love to have you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to link all of that up in the show notes for anyone listening. And thank you so much. This was super, super, super valuable. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Always, always, always. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Thank you, Jazz.
Okay, bye.